Hello, this is the Growth League podcast. My name is Caleb Clark, and my mission for this show is pretty simple. It's to learn from marketers on how they're playing the great game of marketing leadership, their ideas, experiences, perspective, wins and losses, and the playbook that they've established over time. Listen, there's more than one way to lead a marketing team and a marketing function. So if you're a VP, a CMO, director, or someone aspiring to fill one of these marketing leadership roles in the future, tune in to learn from some of the best in the business.
I agree with you. I see marketing as like a revenue generating part of the org. And I think once you convince people of that and you show them, then yes, it's exactly to your point. Like right now, our founder is very much in that mindset where he's like, are we doing enough to build the brand? Like we see the impact that it's having and it's driving. So yeah, there's more of that question on like, are we doing enough?
My guest today, Whitney Bell, the VP of Marketing at Clutch. Whitney, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Caleb. No, thanks for having me.
So give me and give our listeners a bit of a summary overview of what your journey has been leading you up to Clutch as a marketer, as a marketing leader. Give us a bit of a glimpse of what the road looked like for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So taking it way back to my university days, I did like a general degree in business at Queen's, came out of the program, gravitating more towards sales and marketing. So my first 10 years of my career was in the CPG world. So started off in a sales role at Kraft for about 2 years. And then I transitioned to Unilever, where I spent the next 8 years. So I really grew up. A lot of my foundation building was at Unilever. And I think when I joined Unilever, I realized it was very much like a marketing company and I wanted to be on that side. So I transitioned when I was there over to the brand management side, got to work on some really amazing brands like Dove and Axe. And I think after 10 years, I was just looking for a bit of a change, something a bit more fast paced, a bit more ownable. And this opportunity came up when Lyft was launching in Canada, its first international market. And they asked, would you be interested in leading the marketing function there? And so I sort of jumped at that opportunity. I thought it was a nice way to transition into tech without moving into too small of a company. So there's still lots of resources. And so I spent the next about 3.5 years at Lyft, initially just leading Canada. I also worked on international expansion and the US as well. And then in 2020, I found out, I was pregnant with my son, and then COVID hit. It was just a crazy time. And obviously ride sharing was really impacted by the pandemic. And so I think I took that time to kind of reevaluate, what am I coming back to? Will I still be getting to work on these projects that I was really excited about? Had a lot of really transparent conversations with my manager at that time. And there was a lot of uncertainty. So at that time, I met the CEO of Clutch, Dan Park, who kind of ironically had come from Uber. So we had some similar background. Yeah. And he kind of pitched this idea of Clutch to me where it's a Canadian company. I'd never worked for a Canadian company before. It was Series A at the time. So very much startup mentality. And really, he said, you can have the opportunity to come in, build from the ground up the strategy, the team. And I just thought that's such an exciting opportunity. I can't really pass that up. So I've been at Clutch now for just over 2 years. And yeah, that's kind of been my journey.
That's awesome. What a wild tale. A lot of great experiences. And what are some of the very tangible and obvious differences between the CPG world and, this, like you mentioned, fast-paced tech, planning quarter by quarter, not necessarily year by year? Is that something that attracted you, or what's the big difference that you've noticed?
Yeah, I mean, I love my CPG days, and there's definitely times I still miss it. You just get to work on these amazing campaigns and with really smart people, and you have a lot of resources. But I think what was missing for me was a bit more of that fast pace. Anyone who works in CPG knows this. It's very cyclical, very long lead times. So, we were kind of joking about, you're asking how my planning was going. And in CPG world, you're planning a year out, what's going on next year. very in startup, I feel like it's almost like month to month, like what's going on, things are constantly changing. So that was a big piece for me, was just the speed. And then the other piece was really just the ownership. So when I was working at Unilever, when I was working at Kraft, like oftentimes the headquarters are not in Canada. So, we would have our Canadian HQ, but the global team you'd be working with would be based in the UK,
Right.
in the US. And so often I felt that like you couldn't fully 100% own anything. And that's why moving to a startup, it's like the work you do, that is what is out there. And for good or for bad, it's like you are responsible for that. And I think I was just craving a little bit of that piece of ownership.
That's cool. Presumably you get paid every couple weeks. What do you get paid to do? How would you describe that?
It's a good question. I would say, so specifically in this role, it's really about leading the strategy for getting people across the country to know who Clutch is. When I came in, that was kind of like they were looking specifically for someone who had a bit stronger of a brand building background versus just performance background, which is, a little bit of an anomaly for some startups. A lot of startups start really heavily in the performance marketing space. And it was because when we looked at our brand awareness numbers, it was like low single digits for people of having heard the brand name. And so a big part of my job, like leading the teams, like the number one, making sure like they're all set up for success, but it's also just managing kind of that balance between brand and performance. So making sure that we're working on that top of funnel, bringing people into the brand, understanding what the brand's about, but then also in the lower funnel, converting them, making sure we're still helping the revenue team drive sales.
Yeah. I didn't ask you before, but where was the majority of your background in, on the brand or on the performance side?
It was more heavily on the brand side.
Okay.
And so that was like definitely a conversation when I joined Clutch. I was really transparent about with Dan, the CEO, was, like I've worked on these performance campaigns, especially during my time at Lyft. Like there was a pretty good balance between brand and performance. But traditionally I'd been trained more on the brand building side. But that, like I mentioned, was something they were actually looking for. And I'd say since I've joined Clutch, it's like 50-50 now, almost like what I work on day to day.
Yeah. You mentioned a big part of your job is setting the team up for success. Can you dig into that a little bit? What does that look like for you? Is it something that's become quite natural to you over time, or something that you've had to really dig in and put the time in to learn your approach? What does setting your team up for success manifest as today?
So yeah, I feel like I've absorbed from every leader I've had during my career, like things I like, the things I don't like. So it's definitely been a learning process of like, who am I as a leader? When I was at Unilever, that was like my first time becoming a manager. I had like 2 direct reports. Then when I moved to Lyft, I had up to 30 direct reports. So when I came into Clutch, the kind of number one most important thing to me when I first came in was building the team. There were like 2 or 3 like generalists on the team, but it was really thinking through, okay, like who do we need? How's this team going to be set up for success? And like, how can I help them achieve their goals? I realize I'm very much like a servant leader, and that's kind of the leadership style I tend to gravitate towards. So first coming in, it's really like spending time with the team, getting to know them on a human level. I do this thing with them called like a user manual, and it literally goes through like what motivates you, what irks you, like what your pet peeves. Are you a morning person, night person? Do you prefer Slack or text? How do you like to be praised? Things like that, just to really get to know people, and everyone is so different. And then spending the time to learn from them, like tell me what you're good at, like what skill set are you missing, and then kind of figuring out those gaps, like how can I as your manager, like your leader, help you get to the next level, or like come in and give value to you. So that's sort of always been my approach, and I think it's a good way to build trust with the team. And then I very much believe in the like high like autonomy type of relationship. So it's like once we build that trust, you do your thing. If you need me, I'm here. But I think like I'd say not many people love like a micromanager. So that's not my style.
That's good. What does the team look like today? What roles are fulfilled? What does it look like?
Yeah, I'd say that the team's changed a lot too over the past 2 years. like Clutch was impacted like a lot of the tech companies. So we had a larger team at one point last year. Unfortunately, we did scale back at some point. We're starting to kind of rebuild. But overall, how I've thought about building it out is having the brand side and the performance side, and then they just very closely collaborate. So we have a director of brand, and then we have a director of growth and performance who literally sit next to each other, are collaborating daily on everything. And then beneath them, we have kind of a set of managers who report into them. We also work with freelancers where it makes sense. So on our blog and some of our SEO, it's really like technical writing that no one on our team has real expertise in. So we outsource that, as well as we work with an external PR agency and then like creative and media buying agency as well. But we tried to do as much in-house as possible. So like a lot of our digital buying, online video, all that we'll do in-house.
Why do you gravitate towards in-house? I think that it is the ideal. It is the if the economics work, that's always great. But for you, why do you guys gravitate towards building internal?
Yeah, and I would say we do it where it makes sense, but like when it doesn't or we don't have that internal expertise, we're definitely open to looking external. I mentioned with our blog writer, Clutch is based in the auto industry. It's very technical writing, and it's not like we can just plug into like ChatGPT, like write me this blog. It has to be someone who really understands cars. So that's like an example where it makes sense to outsource. Otherwise, I would say we tend to gravitate towards it for certain aspects, just to allow us flexibility to like move really fast. We have in certain examples like worked with agencies in the past, and we found just having that internal kind of like knowledge and expertise has helped us when we're experimenting or implementing changes. So it really depends on like what we're looking at, but I think it's just like that nimbleness, especially in a startup world, that it can help us move faster sometimes.
And most folks are actually physically co-located, or do you do a bit of a hybrid of that, or is everyone remote?
I'd say we're a bit of in a unique situation where we're 5 days a week in office, which most people when I tell them are quite surprised. And we were hybrid when I initially joined, so 3 days in office, 2 days remote. And then when everything in tech started to take a bit of a turn, so it really shifted from a focus on growth at all costs to more sustainable, profitable growth. Our team is quite small. And so as we chatted about it as a leadership team and just within the org, we felt like at least for the current time, just to make sure we can weather the storm and come out on the other side, just that in-person collaboration for us specifically, because we are a smaller team, is really important. I'd say, who knows, in the future, I could definitely see us moving back to more of a hybrid model.
Well, you must have good snacks and games and comfortable working space.
Lots of good snacks.
For you, when you're driving home after work, do you have any mechanisms in place or systems and processes, maybe not processes, but systems that allow you personally to know with a high level of certainty whether or not you did a good job that day?
That's a great question. I'd say we do tend to track from like a metrics perspective, things not on just like a day-to-day basis, but literally like hourly basis.
Right.
So my team has implemented a lot of really useful dashboards, kind of our North Star metrics, where from purely a metrics perspective, if I'm driving home and I can check those like I have 1 or 2 key dashboards at the end of the day with like the metrics, I can say like, okay, our team is like achieving what's sort of our expectation or what's been expected of us. So yes, on that point, I'd say another big piece of being a leader is just like how the team is feeling. And so while I'm very open and constantly asking for feedback, and I think it's very much like a two-way, my team members know that about me, like in every status meeting, we'll say like, do you have feedback for me, and vice versa. I'd say like that's kind of the other way I sort of know how I'm performing as a leader, just based on like the vibe I'm getting from the team, like how the interactions have been going that day, how like the cross-functional relationships are feeling. That's sort of my other metric.
Yeah, it's a balance of quantitative and qualitative and how you, right? That's great. If you were to take your team and sort of stack them up against any other marketing team in either similar industries or different, what would you and your team agree is just the absolute like strongest component of your mix, or the area that if you had an endless amount of cash you would double down on, as compared to what would you all agree is the biggest painful challenge for your team right now?
That's a great question. I feel like kind of constantly changing. I'd say our biggest, so over the past 2 years since I've joined, we've really tried hard to shift our media mix from as much paid channels to more owned channels. So when I talk about why it's so important for us to build the brand, it's because we eventually need to go to a spot where we can't just pay like for everything. But at the end of the day, it's harder to build our brand equity on those channels. And that's why we're really investing in the brand, because one, it'll help us build that like long-term equity. But what we've also seen is it really fuels the flywheel for performance. So when we spend more on brand, it actually makes our performance and growth dollars much more efficient. We see that our CAC come down, our CPAs come down.
Yeah.
So I'd say we've been doubling down on the areas where we're seeing promising results. And so one of that has been like in the brand.
Yeah.
And then we're trying to get away from some of these channels where it's tough to build brand equity, and it's like we're just like really like throwing money at it, but it's not like very sustainable for the
Yeah.
future.
It seems to me quite unique, and I'd imagine that you feel grateful about this, but with leadership that believes in the value of brand and investing in brand, as compared to, like, I totally understand from an investing side of things, and fundraising side of things, there used to be a day where it was growth at all cost, and now it's moved to sustainable profitability, more bottom line indicators. But a lot of times brand in these scenarios is on the back burner. How has that created a competitive advantage for you that has leadership buying into more long tail, less trackable, but there's a belief there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say it definitely takes some convincing at the beginning, because you're right. Like it's hard when you start investing in brand to show as much tangible result as you can with performance dollars, which is like, we spent this much, it converted this lead, we got this sale. With brand, it's a longer time horizon. It can also increase your CAC. So it's a little bit scary to invest in the channel that you're not seeing an immediate return.
Yeah.
So I think we did it very like slowly, and we were really focused. So we didn't start with a massive budget. It was like,
Yeah.
let's test these channels, see how it performs. So we did a lot of experimenting and testing at the beginning. So testing, TikTok, YouTube, even like some TV tests, different partnerships, and really tried to prove out, okay, like this is what moves the needle, this is what doesn't. And I think that aspect really helped buy in the CEO and the founder, and to the point where they're now, yeah, like very supportive of it. They understand. I would also caveat that like our budget still is not like 50% brand, 50%
Yeah.
performance. We still skew definitely more heavier to the performance side. And I think that's natural with a lot of startups,
Yeah.
and e-commerce companies. But yeah, you see brands like Airbnb, which are actually massive, but they're now like have really flipped that and are spending more on brand than they are on performance. And I think aspirationally, that's where we want to get one day.
Right. Yeah. There's a number of different KPIs and metrics that you can measure across brand and across performance. But if you were meant to give sort of an executive summary to maybe it's a monthly leadership meeting or something like that, what ultimately is the marketing function held accountable to? Like, what is the business case that you have to, whereas if everything else falls by the wayside, or through optimization cycles, your KPIs aren't hitting targets, none of that matters. What is the ultimate, what does it boil down to?
Yeah, I would say the top three metrics were really held to, like the board would care about, that we're presenting on a daily basis to leadership. Number one would be our CAC, so our cost to acquire a customer. I think, when you look at CAC, it's not just the marketing team that affects that. Obviously, that comes down with the more products you sell. So it's touched by really every part of the organization, like our revenue team, our product team, and so on. But I would say definitely very much an important part for marketing, just to show like our marketing dollars being efficient.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's number one. Number two would be more top of funnel, like how many sessions or like the type of traffic we are driving to the website. So Clutch is a purely online company. We're not in brick and mortar, we're like 100% online. So it's really important that we're driving traffic to our site, but not only just that we're driving traffic, but that's high quality traffic.
Yeah.
So we'll look at things like what's our bounce rate, how many people are coming to our landing page and then converting to our vehicle display page, just to ensure like how much time are they spending on the site, so that it's like a good quality, potentially high intent lead.
Right.
That would be number 2. And then 3, more on the brand side, would just be our brand awareness. So right now we're looking more at aided awareness.
Right.
And so we will do that through, brand lift studies with our partners or brand health tracking on more of like a quarterly basis, just to see how that's changing over time.
Because that was the original problem, wasn't it? You said single digits brand awareness. And so that's a key indicator.
Exactly. And we know that there's been a lot of studies done, and that if you can get your brand awareness to around like 50%, that's really the sweet spot where it makes your performance dollars like much more efficient. So for 2024, that's a major goal for us.
Yeah. Can you tell me, you mentioned that before. Tell me a little bit more about what you guys have been able to do to clearly see correlation between a dollar invested in brand and its impact on the performance side. Like, I can't imagine that's an easy thing to measure accurately and consistently, but what have you been able to do to create that clarity with that relationship?
Yeah, and it's not a perfect science, but what we have done is, so when we have like our brand campaign running, obviously the goal with that will be more top of funnel and really awareness. But what we'll also implement to complement that campaign on the growth side is more of this like retargeting to build that next layer of consideration or more trust in the brand. So we might have a spot on running on YouTube that's just like, this is Clutch, this is what we do. It's more like educational top line. Then we'll run growth or performance ads that often, a good example would be like a customer testimonial. So someone who's bought or sold a car with us, and then that just really instills the trust in the brand. Like, okay, this is a legit thing, and someone used it. And so what we'll look at on the growth side is some of the metrics, just like cost per view, and just like look at it, really how efficient that campaign is running. And what we've seen is when we run them together, those metrics all tend to improve. And so it's not a perfect science, but that's kind of
that
what
makes sense. Like, I guess when the brand community grows month over month, quarter over quarter, the efficiency of a retargeting effort goes up because the base of, hopefully it's qualified, relevant people within that brand community base, but that makes sense.
Exactly. And we haven't yet, I know a lot of companies do run like MMMs, like mixed media models, where you can probably more accurately measure the impact of brand and growth, the channels on each other.
Yeah.
So that's something we've, exploring and talking about. We just haven't.
Yeah.
And
yet. That's always a tricky one, right? Because you get these sophisticated attribution and measurement models, and then you become married to that data where biases can form and you can become a bit blind. So anyways, that's a whole different topic. But for you personally, when you go to work, what do you feel is like I use this a lot, but what is your superpower as a marketing leader that you would claim to be the thing that you rely on mostly to be successful and effective in your job, as compared to what is an area that's just like, I am consistently looking for growth because I would consider it an area of weakness personally?
I would say on the superpower side, it's been the relationship building. So I think across any industry I've worked in, any organization, I've realized that has been really important into getting me to like where I've, come today, and also just developing that trust within the organization. So I often make it my goal when I join like a new company to take the time to meet not just like the rest of the executive team, but really like a lot of people at the company, the mid managers and below. Because I think when you really form a connection, and you don't have to be like best friends, but if you get to know someone just on a human level, then there's going to be that respect, and also just that willingness to help each other out when you need. At startup, things move really quickly. resources are extremely limited. And so, if I'm reaching out to the devs team and asking them for like a special favor, and I think if you have that relationship, they're going to be much more willing to like go the extra mile to help you out.
Yeah.
And so I think that's always been really important to me at any company I've worked with, just developing those cross-functional relationships.
Yeah.
And I always urge my team to do the same, like spend the time with other teams. Don't get caught in a silo of just like a marketing bubble. What I could do better, I'm sure there's many things. I think one thing is sometimes, so I mentioned like very much like the servant leadership style of model. I think sometimes, when it comes to working on a strategy deck or implementing something, it can often feel just easier to do things myself sometimes, especially when we are a very lean team. And it's like, oh, I don't really want to bug that person or do this. So sometimes I'll just be like, I'll just do it. And I think that's like not the right approach when you're a leader. You have to give people on your team just the opportunity to try and fail. Like, I think you actually often learn more from your failures than from your successes. So I think that's something I'm constantly working on, is just giving those opportunities to my team and being like, it's okay. I don't need to like control different aspects, and like let them run with it and propose the solutions and come up with how they're going to solve the challenges. That's something I'm kind of like always working on, that balance of like when I lean in and help them out, and when I just kind of let them figure it out for themselves.
Yeah. I struggle with that too. So you're not alone. It's funny. Outside of work, like when you get there and you start working on your task list or whatever you're focused on, what are some of the areas of your personal life that best position you to be an effective leader, whether it be like ways that you're sharpening your sword from a capability standpoint, or maybe things like, do you have a routine with family or things that, how does Whitney show up the best she can?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think like one, it's just like I'm always my best self when I'm also, have like some self-care in my personal life. So I have a toddler, life is really hectic, but to me, like carving out time to work out is really important to me. I feel like the mornings when I dedicate the time to doing even like a 20-minute run or whatever that is, I just show up as a better person for my team. And I feel like as much as it's for my physical health, it's more for my mental health. And then I'd say when I'm at work, like for refining my skills, I get a lot of inspiration and from my peer set. So I think I've been lucky, and a lot of the people I've previously worked with at, Lyft and Unilever, I stay in touch with. I try, some of my really great friends are in similar roles at different companies. So really connecting with them, being like, hey, what's the latest and greatest with you? Like, what challenges are you facing? What have you been working on? And I love that kind of network too, that if I have like a question, I can go to them and kind of get their POV or bounce an idea. I also have a mentor outside of the company, which I always recommend to people because he's unbiased. He can be a great sounding board. He has great experience. So that's been important to me. And then I think the third thing, I joined an organization this year called Monday Girl, which I think it's important now I've spent over 15 years in marketing, and I think it's really important for me to like give advice to like younger, like women coming up through the ranks, but I also learn a lot through them as well. So I'll do these mentoring sessions. Usually there's like 8 to 10 people who join, they'll ask questions, but I'm also, trends are constantly changing in marketing. Everything's like always changing. So I like derive as much from them, I'm sure, as they do from me.
Oh, that's really cool. Good for you for doing that, because I'm assuming you grew up through that 15 years with being on the flip side of that mentorship, right?
For sure. And that's why, I think it's always really important to kind of try to give back.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing. I meant to ask this earlier, but a lot of marketing leaders right now are going into budget planning and planning for the year, probably already done, but sometimes it pushes into December and January. Not getting into specifics at all with like certain dollar amounts or anything like that, but more so the art of planning and forecasting and budgeting. What's been your established playbook on that? So like, you have a blank sheet of paper, so to speak, from a budget or a plan standpoint. Where do you start? Do you think about, okay, well, let's just carbon copy what did last year, or How do you approach that? Because it's a difficult task for some.
It is, and I'd say the budget's probably, yeah, one of the areas for planning for the next year that always takes like the most time and thought. How I tend to approach it, how I'm literally doing this in the midst of this right now, is one, aligning more on like a top-down budget with the CEO. So kind of understanding, okay, what's the P&L looking like next year? Like what numbers do we have to hit, like just for the overall company? And usually from that, we'll get like a general sense of where the marketing budget should lie. Like a rule of thumb I see too for like B2C companies is usually the marketing budget's about like 5 to 10% of like the total revenue of the company. So I kind of always like gut check that. Like, are we spending enough on marketing? Because I think you mentioned earlier, like it often can be one of the areas that gets cut when the company needs to scale back. So that'll just be top down, which is literally more just like a number. And then what I'll do is start with like a blank G sheet and do more of a bottom up build. Right. So it's like, okay, if we need to achieve this target, whether it's retail units or a CAC, figuring out, I'll split it into like performance and growth, and then brand, and then agency, on what do we need? Like, what are the channels we need to help us achieve that goal? Right. And then it's kind of like a balancing act. So figuring out whether we're going to be efficient enough for agency fees. I think one thing I learned at Unilever is like you always want to have a good balance of like working to non-working dollars. So if you're going to have a spot that's out in the world, you want to make sure you're spending enough against, but not too much against it. Right. So that's sort of the approach I typically tend to take. And then there's many iterations. It's not just like one and done. It's constantly being finessed and changed.
Oh, that seems like a great process. Probably learned over time. I think you mentioned that.
Yeah, I think I picked up a little bit of like every company I've worked at. So Unilever was like very diligent, probably on their budgeting process. So I took a bit from there, and then I, took things from Lyft, and then even at Clutch, I'm still like learning different ways people approach it. But I think that top down, and then we call it like the bottom up build approach, has worked pretty well.
Well, I heard from you a couple times mention of, are we spending enough? And I think that that's one example of experience in budget building, is that most times when you're kind of getting into this game of marketing leadership, you're like, I know we're being seen as a cost center, so I want to, but when you start to transcend towards, we're not a cost center, we're an area of investment and return, and there's a direct correlation into the business case, then the next level leaders, in my opinion, are asking the question, are we doing enough? Because we have an opportunity here to carve market share.
Absolutely.
And it would be terrible to spend 60% of what we ought to be, where if we just spend that extra 40, but that takes time and confidence, right?
Agreed. And yeah, to your point, like you're kind of like bang on there. I think historically, and even when I've joined some companies, definitely it's been like, marketing's the cost center. So you feel like you're constantly having to prove yourself and like prove the ROI, prove the ROAS. But then I agree with you. I see marketing as like a revenue generating part of the org. And I think once you convince people of that and you show them, then yes, it's exactly to your point. Like right now, our founder is very much in that mindset where he's like, are we doing enough to build the brand? Like we see the impact that it's having and it's driving. So yeah, there's more of that question on like, are we doing enough?
Yeah. Do you have any questions for me?
I mean, some of the questions you asked me, I would love to hear for you as well. And I actually, one I'd be interested in knowing too is like marketing is constantly evolving, changing. Like what trends are you most sort of excited about for next year?
It's a good question. I mean, I don't want to talk about AI because it's a different,
I was like,
topic.
Yeah, it's the obvious answer, but I mean, no one can really escape it.
But I like what you said, and something that I'm a lot more curious about right now is finding ways to become less reliant on paid media dollars, pay to play, but more so building tribes and culture and community around brand, leveraging own channels. Everyone is trying to build, I mean, in your case, an app is critical to the experience, but like there's other app-based organizations that are trying and failing, I think, at going kind of embracing what his own channels mean and kind of going too fast or too hard on it, but to start small and start to build that tribe, because I see it as like an equity bank, where if you're building people and tribe into that, you can become less reliant on pay to play, and you can leverage them as the marketing army. So it's not a new trend, but I think there's new ways to consider that idea of how does building our own community look like or sound.
Absolutely. Yeah, agree.
I think more rigor in user generated content is something I'm interested in, not just like, okay, well, let's just work with these 20 influencers because they have reach, but like being a lot more intentional about that kind of thing, and maybe not even looking at influencers necessarily, but looking at the common day folk that use the service and pulling out their stories, using that as the DNA to build the system. And then the last thing is that I think I'm a huge advocate that marketing uh, needs to get more serious and more innovative in establishing themselves as a profit center. I want to eradicate this belief that marketing is the first to get cut, and marketing is this. And the reason why marketing is the first to get cut is because there has not been enough effort and attention in tying the activities to the business case. It's random acts of marketing. It's, non-attributed activity. So that's what I'm think
I
about
love
most.
I love all those. Yeah, totally agree. I especially on the user generated content one too. That's an area we started exploring this year a lot more, and we've seen success. But to your point on like the common day folk, we've tested a couple like really, I would say like very micro influencers. But what we are seeing is that I think, yeah, when people see people like them or feel like they're being represented in our advertising, yeah, they're way more willing to engage with the brand, which has been kind of like nice for us to see.
Yeah. But actually, the last thing I wanted to say, I want to get your thoughts on it too, is that this won't be a popular opinion amongst some of our listeners that are agency side folks. Categorically, I run an agency as well, but I really don't like agencies. And the reason for that is because I think the business model for most agencies is incongruent with what value looks like for the client. And specifically, what I mean is most agency business models are based on billable hours, marked up expenses, and a lot of time outsourced execution. And that drives a wedge between integration as partners. It creates transactional. It creates and agencies are put in position where they need to grow their accounts, right? But growing the account doesn't necessarily mean value to the client. It's so that's the other thing that I would stand on a soapbox about, is that what marketing departments need is an injection of expertise and capacity, but really what they need is as something as close to an internal team as possible, not an agency and a client relationship. I think that needs to change, and that's our whole effort.
I love that. And to your point, even in my days as some of my previous companies, we often would have the agency, like sit in our office for 2 or 3 days of the week, so that they really just felt like an extension of the team. So it wasn't so much this like agency client type of kind of archaic model. Also, more recently, our director of brand that we hired comes from the agency side. Like he spent a lot of time at advertising agencies, which has been nice because I think, what we strive to do is just be like so transparent with agencies. It's like, we're a startup, we're small, we're nimble, we don't have these massive budgets. So when we talk through, like the billable hours and things like that, and like what we can actually take off their plate. And then when you get to this kind of like high trust model, it works a lot better. And then it really does feel like you're all one team versus like two sides.
Totally. Well, I'm glad that resonates with you, because that means it's working. It's the people who believe in that. So I learned a lot from you. I think that a lot of marketing leaders can take a lot of nuggets from this, and just I think one thing that stuck out to me a lot, which is people on our team, we have to remember they are people. They have different ways of looking at the world, and it becomes our job simply to facilitate ways to get the full person out. And that means understanding what makes that person tick. And so as compared to, here are the parameters of the role, I don't care what's going on with you or how you like to do work, but this is what needs to get done. I think that your investment into that and how you consider it a superpower just further pushes the precedent that this is what marketing leadership looks like today. And those that embrace that will be the ones that lead the most effective functions and teams. And those that don't will be cost centers forever.
Mm-hmm.
So
No, I appreciate that.
awesome. Everyone, my guest, Whitney Bell, thank you so much.
Thanks, Caleb. Really great chatting today.